Throughout the ages, mankind has created an astonishing array of technologies, devices, and weapons that have been lost to the pages of history. What would it be like to go back in time and experience the most ingenious inventions of the past?
Fire!
Our team of master craftsmen has agreed to find out. Together, for the first time in history, we've asked the guys at the Scare Factory to bring back to life the most creative, inspired, and deadly inventions of all time. The goal is simple: to relive the past by exploring, experiencing, and surviving history. Columbus, Ohio, home of the Scare Factory. A team of welders, carpenters, and artists are gearing up to build and test a new set of historical devices.
What we're really getting into when we build these historical recreations is something called experimental archaeology. And now what that is building devices from the past, testing them on ourselves, and seeing how well they work. These experiments would, give us a glimpse back in time, give us a chance to see what it might be like to live 100 years ago, 500 years ago, maybe 1,000 years ago, and give us a chance to relive some history. And what could really be better than that?
Chad and his team of fabricators are gathering to discuss a new historical experiment.
What we're building is the Halifax gibbet, which is basically the predecessor to the guillotine.
The Halifax gibbet was a beheading device used in Halifax, England. It was kept outdoors on display to deter thieves and other criminals. Between 1541 and 1650, at least 53 people were executed on the gibbet.
It's got to be 15 foot tall. Biggest thing, I need a channel cut.
The Halifax gibbet consists of two 12-foot channel-cut wood uprights. Inside the uprights is the blade, which is mounted into a massive wood block. A rope and pulley system is attached to the top of the device so that the blade can be hoisted up and then dropped on the condemned.
What's cool about the Halifax gibbet is the amount of crushing power it has. Unlike the guillotine, which is designed to slice through a head, the Halifax gibbet was designed for its actual crushing power. Imagine trying to cut somebody's head off with a butter knife. It's going to require a lot more force than if you used a razor-sharp blade. Basically, we got the rough dimensions and size of the blade. Right now, I'm going to put the cutting portion on it.
While Chad begins to sharpen the blade for the Halifax gibbet, Dave, the Scare Factory's team leader, checks in on his progress.
So how thick is that? Quarter inch?
Quarter inch thick.
So take that thing up, put a bunch of weight on it, and raise it 15 feet in the air, and then be looking up as it's pointed at your neck to come down and bam! Holy Toledo.
The original gibbet blade was nearly 10 1/4 inches long and just over 8 3/4 inches wide. It weighed 7 pounds, 12 ounces. As Chad mounts the gibbet blade into the weighted wood block, Keith Pepperell, an expert in historical technology, and Brian meet with Josh, the floor supervisor, to provide some historical perspective.
This is the upright for the Halifax gibbet. There's going to be two of them, and it's going to hold the blade in the center, and then the blade's going to slide down and hopefully chop off his head.
What kind of people were subjected to this?
Over the course of more than 100 years, a whole bunch of felons, but particularly people who stole cloth.
Cloth?
Cloth. Halifax is a centre in Yorkshire of the woolen industry, and so many of the executed persons had committed crimes associated with stealing wool.
Criminals only needed to steal about $1 worth of wool to be executed on the gibbet. Even more shocking, many victims were executed illegally. According to the common laws of England, the right of local townships to perform executions had previously been revoked. Somehow, Halifax slipped through the cracks. While the guys continue their experiment on the gibbet, DJ begins another historical recreation, the Chinese water torture. Chinese water torture is a medieval device that constantly drips water on the forehead of its victims, slowly driving them insane. Once victims were adequately debilitated, torturers could easily extract information or obtain confessions.
Hey, DJ. Hey, DJ.
Keith and Brian check in with DJ to take a look at the device and give him a little historical background on Chinese water torture.
What do you got?
Well, basically, we're using this old dentist chair to put our victim in for the Chinese water torture. This here will be our drip pan. It has a hole drilled in this finial right here, so it can gather the drop right above the person's head.
Like the idea. And Chinese water torture? Probably not Chinese.
Historical texts suggest that the Chinese water torture didn't originate in China, but in Italy. Lawyer Hippolytus de Marcellus created the device in the 15th century as a way to extract information from criminals. The name Chinese water torture was added to give the device a sense of mystery. One important part of the Chinese water torture recreation is the water source. The guys decide to use a giant piece of ice. Then the drippings will be channeled to the collection pan. DJ cuts the ice down to size, and it doesn't take long for him and the team to assemble the rest of the device.
I think the guys are really enjoying this trip through history. Not just building the devices, but also having the opportunity to test them as well. More importantly, they've all agreed to be test subjects for each of the devices.
Todd, one of the shop's artists, volunteers to be tested in the Chinese water torture device. His first-hand experiences in the device will provide a true sense of what this torture is really all about.
And then they just kept restraining me with all kinds of apparatuses. I don't really know what was on my feet.
We can move him. That's pretty good.
When they placed something around my neck and it started tightening, that was probably the most, I think, scary moment. It was a bad place to be.
Todd braces himself for the slow agony of the Chinese water torture. Oddly enough, the constant dripping is very similar to an Indian healing therapy. A soothing spa treatment known as Shirodara involves dripping warm oil onto the forehead. Victims of Chinese water torture found the treatment relaxing before gradually experiencing symptoms of insanity.
So, are you comfortable? Ooh, is that cold? Okay. We got a whole block of ice that should last a good 10 hours.
I feel like I'm gonna be here a long time.
Yeah, I mean, you're here as long as we decide you're here, I guess.
I know.
Josh clocked you out, so I don't really care at this point.
This is gonna drive me insane.
Todd from the art department is participating in an historical experiment, learning firsthand what it's like to experience Chinese water torture. Meanwhile, Chad and his team continue their exploration of an Old English predecessor to the guillotine, the Halifax gibbet.
The most important thing to get right is the distance between the uprights. It's got to be perfect. If it's too close together, the blade won't move up or down. If it's too far apart, the entire device will come apart.
The original Halifax gibbet uprights were 15 feet tall, and the wood block which held the blade was 4 1/2 feet in length. These precise dimensions were noted in the Chronicles of England, Scotland, and Ireland, one of the first ever written histories of the British Isles. Playwright William Shakespeare used these chronicles as the source material for many of his historical plays. Todd has been in the Chinese water torture for over an hour, and the guys are wondering how he's doing.
So as I'm watching Todd in the device, you know, he's strapped in the chair, we've got the whole thing rigged up, and the water's starting to drop. As it went on more and more, his composure changed.
The unnerving repetition of dripping water, combined with the anxiety felt from being restrained, causes victims to experience symptoms of psychological trauma, including breathlessness, heart palpitations, and the inability to think clearly.
I would describe this as probably the most irritating feeling in the world.
I think that there's a shift that happens when it's out of your control. You want it to stop, but you can't make it stop, and that's when the terror kicks in, and that's when it becomes torture.
I can see why this would be a torture device, because, you know, you can't focus or think on it about anything else. Your senses are completely controlled by just one drop.
Get your asses in here and get me out of this chair!
now.
Had enough?
Yeah, I had enough. Yeah, don't raise me too fast, dude. Okay.
Yeah.
You might want to loosen up on the neck.
How you feel?
I feel a little horrible right now.
The simple fact of being restrained is terrifying.
Well,
I mean, nobody likes that. Everybody gets that panic attack, but then
Right.
the fact that it's...
I'm focused. I actually lost a lot of feeling, most of my body. I couldn't feel much of anything because all your, mind and all your control and wherever you're trying to think is just being blocked.
Prolonged exposure to Chinese water torture will also cause physiological changes in its victims. Large amounts of adrenaline will dump into the bloodstream, and combined with the intense feelings of anxiety, victims will often hurt themselves attempting to escape.
A couple of hours in the water torture, you'd probably be done for.
All right, well, you want to do it one more time, or are you done?
I think I'm done. This was a real torture device. I would have gladly given up any information and confessed to whatever the crime was or whatever I did to just get out of the chair.
Chinese water torture was used as recently as 1998. Tunisian authorities used the technique to extract information from students who were protesting government policy. The historical experiment on the Chinese water torture is complete, and the rest of the guys continue their exploration of the Halifax gibbet.
It's looking pretty massive, pretty cool. I don't think the brutal factor is going to come in until we actually start seeing it cut things in half.
So the coolest thing about the gibbet is who got to pull the pin. Say you stole an ox. They would take that ox, tie it to the pull pin, and then whack it on the behind. Ox would move forward, the blade drops, and now the ox is your executioner. Now, if you stole an inanimate object, then the crowd got involved.
The people of Halifax didn't just watch the executions, they had an active role. If the accused had stolen an inanimate object, then the crowd would actually get to pull the pin and drop the blade on the victim. Dr. Sestek, an expert in emergency medicine, is on hand to highlight the physical damage caused by the gibbet.
Even if it didn't take the head off, just the sheer weight and the acceleration would cause irreparable damage to the airway, the trachea. There'd be disruption to the great vessels, i.e. the carotid arteries, and of course, significant injury to the cervical spine. The crushing type trauma would result in death.
While victims of the guillotine faced downward, criminals executed on the gibbet faced upward, forced to witness the horror of their impending doom. The original gibbet blade is on display in Halifax's Bankfield Museum. The guys are ready to begin the testing phase of their historical experiment and are eager to see the gibbet in action.
Get the rope ready. All right, 3, 2, 1, go. Go.
The gibbet's weighted blade has tremendous kinetic energy at the point of impact. The 150-pound cutting machine, falling from 9 feet, is generating energy comparable to a baseball traveling at 300 miles per hour.
Well, I think it all works quite successfully. It's a giant chopping block.
This gibbet, it's pretty scary. My name is Chrissy, and I work up in the office here at the Scare Factory. I'm Dave's assistant. And just looking at it, it kind of gives you the creeps. It just makes you realize that this thing is not something to mess around with.
The gibbet is working well, so the guys start breaking it down for reassembly in the shop's testing area.
So when the guys were bringing in the gibbet, the art department and I finished up the test dummies. We loaded it up with some blood packs and a hard rigid foam neck in it and put a camera in its forehead so we can really see the blade coming down.
The entire Scare Factory team is standing by, ready to experience the devastating power of the Halifax gibbet.
We've got the character prepped. We have the crowd assembled. 3, 2, 1, go.
Oh, that is freaking nasty. Look at this running down.
When the gibbet came down, it was like, slam!
I think the camera mounted in the head worked out great. When you see the blade coming down, you really get a sense of what it feels like to be underneath this thing. This is really what these people saw in their last few seconds on this earth.
His head is completely removed.
The test on the dummy was complete, But now it was time to test the gibbet on a live human subject.
As part of the team, we're all subjected to this. So the rules are everybody, and I mean everybody here, is fair game.
The team has built a wheel of misfortune featuring the names of every shop employee. The lucky team member whose name comes up will get to experience firsthand the horrors of the Halifax gibbet.
Chrissy!
Shut up! I just heard everyone start yelling, and then I heard him say my name.
Please come forward.
No way!
Okay, obviously, we're not going to cut your head off.
I'm just Dave's assistant. I stay up in the office, so I had no idea that I'd be participating in these experiments.
Here, come around here so you can see what's going on. So there's a block there and a block there. So if you pull it up halfway. So even if those blocks would crack or something, which they won't because there's 4 of them, then that catcher's mask would protect you. Go up a little more. So if you drop it, go ahead.
Oh my God!
You'll be fine!
They dropped it, and the blocks just kind of split. And then I heard everyone start laughing, and I was like, there's no way.
Hey, can we maybe stop for a minute so that we can maybe test it a couple more times, just make sure that, would you feel better if we did that? A little bit? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Can I call my mom?
Why don't you call your mom? Just let her know what's going on, okay?
All right.
While Chrissy steps out to call her mom, the team makes a small modification to the device.
We have no intention of dropping 150 pounds of wood, steel, anything at someone's neck. So obviously a fake blade had to be fabricated.
The guys switch out the real blade for a fake one, but keep it a secret from Chrissy. Her personal experience in the gibbet will be authentic without putting her in any real danger.
The fake one that Eric's team put together looks almost exactly like this. We gotta put a little blood on the blade, that's about it.
Hey, right here's your mom.
I know what these guys build. I know what they make. I know it should be, in my head, it's safe. But it's my daughter going into this thing that's supposed to decapitate you. So, you know, there's that mommy part of me that's not very comfortable with it.
No. Do you want to come see it?
Yes, I do want to go see it, I think.
You think?
I think.
Chrissy and her mom head toward the shop's testing area. Will she lose her nerve and try to escape?
In 1623, John Lacey actually escaped execution. He fled the gibbet, pursued by local townspeople, but got outside of the parish.
At the time, the laws in Halifax stated that if you were able to escape the gibbet and leave the parish, you were free. But you were banished for life. If you returned and were caught, then you were literally back on the chopping block. Foolishly, John Lacey returned to Halifax 7 years later and was promptly executed.
Don't forget your catcher's mask there. I picked it up off the floor so you wouldn't lose it.
Chrissy's protective gear is in place, and she's ready for the test.
All right, guys, let's hear it for Chrissy. Yeah! Okay, you want to walk around that way and lay down and look up.
My heart started to beat a little bit then, and as I got closer and then finally laid down, like, I was shaking really bad.
You're shaking a little bit, you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay.
You sure?
Yeah.
Well, when I saw Chrissy get down the gibbet, the first thing I thought of was, yeah, she's got to have brass balls, because if you would have told me to get down, I would have, no way. You got to keep your hands down because it's going to stop right here. Exactly. Okay?
Good idea.
My heart was just going crazy, like absolutely crazy. If like it was going to beat out of my chest.
Are you okay? Do not move.
And I was just waiting. I think I closed my eyes.
3, 2, 1, go.
Chrissy is lying in the Halifax gibbet, ready to experience firsthand the horrors of this 13th century beheading device. What she doesn't realize is that the guys have replaced the real blade with a foam replica.
When I was lying there and I looked up at first, that was when the adrenaline kicked in.
You sure you're okay?
Yeah. My heart was just going crazy.
You guys all right? You still got it?
I don't know if I can do this.
You can't wait too long because these guys have to hold the weight.
Seriously, don't move.
3, 2, 1, go.
When I felt the blade touch me, I didn't know if I was hurt. You know, I knew that something had touched me, and I knew that it wasn't supposed to.
Oh my God!
And then I heard everyone start laughing. And that's when I knew that I was okay and that they had tricked me.
Oh, wait a minute. Oh, that's not a real blade.
What the jerk?
I had no clue that they rigged the fake blade. I had no idea.
Like my life flashed before my eyes.
I think the guys almost have to have a newfound respect for me, considering that half of them wouldn't go through with it.
I think that we saw genuine terror, and that's hard to do in this day and age, to be able to manipulate a situation safely, correctly, and to show the genuine terror.
Just looking at the gibbet is frightening, let alone laying under it. If I lived in Halifax when this thing was being used, I would definitely think twice before stealing wool or anything else.
Although incredibly effective as a beheading device and a deterrent, the original Halifax gibbet was dismantled in 1650. The device was basically forgotten until 1839, when workers accidentally uncovered the ruins of the gibbet stone scaffold. Near the scaffold, the remains of 2 decapitated victims were also found. Legends suggest that these remains belonged to Anthony Mitchell and John Wilkinson, the last known victims of the device. The Halifax gibbet experiment is complete, and Kermit is starting a new historical recreation, a medieval device called the Iron Boot. The Iron Boot is a metallic boot-shaped device that would tightly bind the victim's feet and legs from below the knee. Once victims were confined in the boot, torturers would drive wooden wedges between the knees, causing leg bones to break and splinter.
We thought the only way to really test the Iron Boot was to use actual bones. We decided on getting some pig legs because they're easily accessible, but unfortunately, we can only get one. So I had to put just a straight-up anatomical leg in the other leg. And pretty gross just putting it in there.
As Kermit continues welding the horrific Iron Boot, historian Keith Pepperell comes over to provide him with some of the history surrounding the device.
This is kind of almost a generic boot. It's kind of a mixture of the Malay boot and the one the Chinese used, and the French had one. The sources are very, very unclear as to when this kind of first used, but certainly lots of evidence, sort of 15th, 16th century.
Several different cultures had their own version of the boot. The Malaysian version featured 2 wooden boards that were placed above and below the victim's feet. A crank mechanism pushed the 2 boards together, shredding the skin and crushing the bones. To truly experience the breaking power of the Iron Boot, Kermit and the team transport the device and the test dummy to an X-ray facility at Dr. Sestak's office. These X-rays should paint a clear picture of the device and the damage it will inflict on the test dummy.
Kermit's handiwork, what is that called?
That's the Iron Boot.
Goodness gracious, the Iron Boot.
The art department has created, this is an artificial limb using, plastics, and then this is actual animal bone.
The guys bind the dummy's legs in the Iron Boot and are now ready to begin the test.
Are the bones in the proper positions?
I think so.
Yeah. Who's got the mallet? Who's got the muscle?
This guy would be screaming a lot, which may affect some of the other patients in your waiting room wondering what's all this screaming about.
Yeah.
Looks like it's putting some pressure on the knee joint.
I hear some sounds.
I hear crackage.
I hear some cracking.
Right here.
Yeah. But boy, it looks as though that proximal part's been broken. I can't tell definitively. We'll do that with an X-ray. We'll be able to find out.
One major advantage the Iron Boot had over other torture devices was its small size. It was very easy to transport from location to location. The boot and dummy legs are X-rayed, and within minutes, Dave receives the results.
What do we got here?
Well, we've got a severely fractured lower leg.
The Iron Boot caused horrible damage to our test dummy. As more and more wedges were inserted, the strain on the bones became so intense that both the pig's tibia and fibula fractured.
And so that by driving those in, it literally took that steel and just snapped it like a twig.
It bent that leg so far out that the bone broke.
The dummy test is complete, But now it's time to see what happens when a real person straps on the iron boot.
Do either of you want to do this? Volunteer to do this?
Yeah, I'll take it. I absolutely put myself in it because I wanted to curb my own curiosity.
All right, you ready?
No.
Okay.
I already don't like it.
Kermit.
Just so you know.
Hey, you just finished up with some patients. What on earth are they roping you into here?
It's very confining. It's uncomfortable to be bound that close together.
Now, after we break his legs, you're going to be able to fix them, right?
Oh, my goodness. No, my background's emergency medicine, not orthopedics.
Well, this will be an emergency. I really considered stopping the experiment at this time because I was in a lot of pain, my legs and my feet. Right now, I mean, my knees are hitting.
As we speak.
I have very limited movement, especially with the wedge in the bottom. It was time to start hammering the wedges in, and I could tell right away it was going to cause some pretty horrible pain. That's rough right there.
That's rough. We have a man whose very strong constitution says he hurts. We've not taken one wedge in, and we have not fractured any bone.
Right.
And he's at the limits of his pain tolerance as we speak.
I thought that with a wedge that most of the pressure would be off the side of my knees, and it's not. Most of the pressure is actually in the mid shaft here, and then just on the inside.
On the inside. So imagine driving wedges in, breaking bones. Again, these devices are unimaginable terror that would be bestowed upon the recipient and anybody that were witness to it.
The devastating bone breakage caused by the iron boot left most victims handicapped for life. Boiling water and hot lead were sometimes poured over the feet, intensifying the pain.
I wouldn't even want to see anybody put through this. I can imagine the pain that they would be unconscious in just a matter of time before, 2 wedges were driven in. The iron boot, it's an awesome beast. This was designed to cause pain. It's agonizing. I can't imagine what it would have been like for people that torture device was actually used on.
While the iron boot was used primarily to extract information and obtain confessions, in Scotland it eventually elevated to high theater. During the 16th and 17th centuries, Scottish royalty found the boot torture so intriguing, they would frequent these torture sessions, considering them high-end entertainment. The recreation and testing of the iron boot is complete. Back at the shop, the team is gearing up to build one of history's most famous torture devices, the Iron Maiden. The Iron Maiden is a large cabinet, usually crafted out of iron or metal. The inside of the cabinet is lined with razor-sharp spikes. Once a victim was inside, the cabinet doors were closed, and the spikes would penetrate the flesh. Some versions of the Iron Maiden were designed to miss major organs, delaying death, but resulting in massive bleeding.
When we were working out the design for the Iron Maiden, we realized to make this experiment work, we needed to create a stylized version.
In order to actually see what happens inside the Maiden as the doors are closed, the team decides to build the doors as open frames. The spikes will be inserted through the door frames, and the entire cabinet will be mounted on a large wooden platform.
Right now, I'm going to start cutting the strips about 72 inches long. That's going to act as the metal banding that goes around the Iron Maiden.
The Iron Maiden is one of the most well-known torture devices ever created, but there are very few documented uses of the device. Scholars now believe that most of the Maiden's history, from its first reference through the 19th century, is most likely fiction.
The earliest references in literature to the Iron Maiden-like device come from ancient Sparta, the 3rd century BC. King Nabius constructed a device resembling his wife.
1,800 years later, the Iron Maiden was rumored to have been used during the Spanish Inquisition. This version was designed to resemble the Virgin Mary, and inquisitors used the spikes to symbolically inject Christian beliefs into their victims. Whether or not the Iron Maiden was actually used during the Inquisition is still a mystery. The guys are working on all the separate pieces for the Iron Maiden, and the device is beginning to take shape.
This is the base for the Iron Maiden. I got everything in place. I just got to make sure it's all solid. So don't touch it, it's hot.
Chad and his team are working on the cabinet. The next step will be the construction of the doors.
It's moving along a lot faster than we thought. We'll finish putting the wood in. We're going to weld these in. Then me and you are gonna get working on the barrel hinges. And then Eric's working on the top.
So right now, I'm just adding a little bit of paint to the topper for the Iron Maiden. This may be the most evil thing I have ever made.
Written in 1844, Persecutions of Property claims that an Iron Maiden was found in a torture chamber used during the Spanish Inquisition. Saddam Hussein's eldest son, Uday, used the Iron Maiden to torture Iraqi soccer players for poor performance. The components of the Iron Maiden are finished, and it's time for the final assembly. Meanwhile, the art department is working on the test dummy, and they're placing actual pig organs inside.
Up and over.
By positioning the organs in their appropriate places, the team will be able to assess the damage caused by the spikes. The guys finish sewing up the dummy, and the entire team is ready to begin testing the device.
Well, obviously, these penetrating probes, if you will, are going to cause injury to vascular structures. And the real thing is, did they end up opening this after they impaled you with it?
Opening the maiden doors will likely kill the victim relatively quickly, but by keeping the doors closed, torturers could prolong the pain and suffering of their victims.
So the idea was to keep the prisoner alive as long as possible, to extract information or get him to confess.
DJ and Josh are ready to slam 30 12-inch long, razor-sharp spikes into a dummy loaded with pig organs.
This is our first body test with the Iron Maiden. Here we go. You guys ready?
Slamming the gates into the dummy with the pig guts, I didn't know what to expect.
I knew whatever happened, it was going to be nasty.
You guys ready? 3, 2, 1, go.
Come on, shove it in there. There you go.
We've lobotomized the guy, obviously. His frontal cortex has had penetrating trauma to it. We've got penetrating injuries right into his chest, probably resulting in injury to his heart. You've got injuries here that look to be in the midline where you could disrupt the abdominal aorta.
All right, can we slowly open this up, slowly?
The team hopes to assess the organ damage caused by the penetrating spikes.
Oh! Pull that down and then...
Yeah! Nasty.
Unfortunately, the experiment doesn't quite work as planned.
That would be an evisceration of his internal organs.
The legendary Iron Maiden had spikes that were strategically placed to avoid major organs. As long as the doors stayed closed, the spikes would plug the wounds. But once the doors were opened, massive bleeding would begin.
After we made the first test on it, you really develop a much, much higher respect for this thing. It's like, whoa, this thing can and will do a lot of damage.
The first test on the Iron Maiden is complete. Dave checks in with Josh, who's beginning another journey through history, this time by reconstructing a 10th century Chinese weapon, the rocket-propelled fire arrows. This revolutionary Chinese weapon utilized gunpowder to fire multiple fire-tipped arrows at its enemies. While the accuracy of the device was questionable, the rocket-propelled arrows were well known for striking fear into opposing armies.
When they originally made the mechanism itself, that it was simply, they chucked them into the end of this like cone-shaped thing and just lit a fuse. And whatever happened, happened.
It's going to be real interesting.
It's going to be very interesting.
The Chinese continue to tweak their design of the rocket-propelled arrow weapon. A later version featured a massive dragon-shaped war machine that fired giant fire-tipped arrows from the dragon's mouth. Josh completes his prototype of the rocket-propelled fire arrows, and it's time to find out if his recreation will work.
3, 2, 1. The arrow flew out of the cannon. It was going fine. It was in a straight line. It was doing good, and then it hit the wall, and it literally just shot up straight up in the air.
Just by happenstance, it went that way. What if it went that way?
You hit the deck, man. In my opinion, it worked great. But for safety reasons, we had to tone it back a bit.
Dave asked Josh to reduce the propulsion of the device.
So let's call this half a charge.
So he cuts down the charges to limit the arrow's thrust.
There are no blueprints for this. We're taking a picture and a story, and we're going from there.
After a few more modifications, it's time for another test.
Yeah, I don't think this is going to do much at all. It won't have the thrust. Just so everybody knows, I got a headwind, so if it does go out and try to do this, just hit the deck and we'll be fine.
I'm cool.
Everybody's scattered. Ready? Yep. 3, 2, 1. Told you. Well, that was the short version of our rocket-propelled arrow.
While Josh rethinks the rocket-propelled arrow weapon, the team sets up a group of soldiers to serve as targets. Like Josh, the Chinese kept improving and refining their version of the arrow weapon. They continued to expand upon the initial design, and the devices kept getting bigger, incorporating more firepower. Eventually, the Chinese built a 4-story tower on wheels that would shoot hundreds of giant arrows across the battlefield. It takes Josh the rest of the day to finish building his flaming arrow rig. Then the guys head outside to see the device in action.
He's been working on this thing forever. All I can say is, it better work.
3 arrows, huh? You gotta hit 3 skeletons with each arrow.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire!
The entire team at the Scare Factory is standing by to watch Josh launch his recreation of the Chinese rocket-propelled fire arrows.
1, fire! Hold it down, hold it down. Hold the button down.
Not getting any warmer out here.
Any day now.
Fire.
Well, the first time we went out to test it, I was extremely disappointed because it didn't work. Give me a CO2 over here, please.
CO2?
I lost battery power because I was running too many rockets off of the electric igniters, and simply, you know, it was just I didn't put enough time into it, didn't put enough thought into it.
No more stories about pyro, no more stories about what you made.
I'm never gonna hear the end of this.
The next morning, Josh was in early to work on his latest version of the rocket arrows.
Now, let's go ahead and keep it. I decided to change it up a bit, go back to even a more primitive method of ignition, which was the cannon fuse, and that's how we do it.
In the year 1232, China's Jin dynasty used the rocket-propelled fire arrows to defend themselves against a Mongol attack. Unfortunately, the firepower of the rockets wasn't enough to stop the Mongol horde. Led by Genghis Khan's son, Ogadai, the Mongols prevailed over the Jin, ending the 119-year-old dynasty. Josh continues his redesign of the rocket-propelled arrow weapon. Meanwhile, the guys prepare the Iron Maiden for one final test.
I volunteered for the Iron Maiden. I knew I wouldn't really get hurt, but I just wanted to see actually what it was like to get into it and see if it was scary at all.
Now we're going to put you in. The one change is we're going to take him down. We're going to put blunt spikes on. So we're going to take the sharp ones out this time.
Yeah.
And we're going to put a blood pack on the very tip of it. So anywhere a spike will come and touch you, it will leave a point so that we can see all those points in your body where you would receive a catastrophic injury from the points. We decided that it would be extremely helpful to cover him in some lightweight, light-colored fabric so that we could see that we would leave a blood mark on each location. So let's get him buckled in there.
Stick your head back. When we started strapping Eric in, it kind of gives you a sense of the people that actually had to put the victim inside of it, standing over top of this thing and getting ready to close these doors. It's like, yeah, you are the hand of death.
The Nuremberg version of the Iron Maiden is considered by many historians to be the first version actually used. Built in the 19th century, this Maiden had its own gruesome twist. The torturer pushed a single button, activating a spring mechanism which injected the spikes into its victim.
Down you go.
3, 2, 1, and go.
Hey, take it slow.
It is going slow.
Brett. Oh, all right.
Where? Tell us, you have to tell us where.
You're going, it's fine.
Just keep going slow.
Once you're actually in the Iron Maiden and you feel pressure, especially against your skull, I mean, it really is scary.
Pull it out slowly, and we'll see. So literally, the face, the throat, the eyes, the skull, the lung, I mean, everywhere you can imagine. You've got probably 8 inches of penetration.
If you're walking up into an Iron Maiden and you're looking at that closet door just lined with razor-sharp spikes, you're just thinking, what the hell did I do wrong? And how are you ever going to live through this? Because you're not. You're not going to live through an Iron Maiden. Once that's closed, that's it. You're done for.
The Iron Maiden's history and lore span over 2,300 years. And while the Maiden continues to be one of the most feared torture devices, its true history remains shrouded in mystery.
That's good.
The Iron Maiden test was complete, and Josh claims he's really ready to launch the fire arrows.
Is the heckle crowd ready? Well, I'll be perfectly honest with you. The second night that I was out there, as we're walking out, I'm kind of thinking, this has got to work. This has got to work, and I'm really stressed out and I'm nervous. The new ignition system that I used is, you know, it worked in testing, so it's got to work. If it doesn't, I'm never going to hear the end of it.
Asshole.
Josh is building something. Bring your chairs and coolers.
Say bye-bye, skeleton horde.
Let's do this.
Perfect. 3, 2, 1, go. 1, higher!
The first arrow shot off, and it shot low, and I was like, oh, man, these things are going to be lame.
Higher! Higher!
And then the next arrow came out and hit that big guy right in the chest and went up in flames. So at that point, you know, I was beside myself.
Who's the man?
Look at the drips. Look at the drips off of it. That's sweet. Look at that.
Give her another.
Thank you very much.
The Chinese rocket-propelled arrows inspired many other cultures to produce similar weapons. The Mongols soon developed their own version, and not long after, rocket experiments began throughout Europe.
Well, it took a lot of work, but in the end, I think we got it. And the team got to see a really cool recreation of an ancient Chinese weapon.